In 2025, the U.S. carried out 26 executions and has 11 more scheduled. From firing squads to nitrogen gas, this year has seen some of the most controversial methods used in decades. Today, we'll look at some of those gruesome executions already carried out, and then we'll talk about the 11 scheduled for execution alongside their crimes, execution methods, and scheduled dates for those who are still on death row this year. If you're fascinated by the realities of capital punishment and the finality of justice, hit subscribe and ring the bell. You won't want to miss what comes next. Recently executed prisoners of 2025. A 28-year-old graduate student at Louisiana State University. On the night of the crime, Molly had just left work when Hoffman abducted her from a campus parking lot. He forced her into his car at gunpoint and drove her to a secluded area outside Baton Rouge. There, Hoffman sexually assaulted her, then executed her with a single gunshot to the head. Her body was discovered 2 days later by search teams, partially buried under pine needles and brush. DNA evidence and tire impressions linked Hoffman directly to the scene, and witnesses confirmed his presence near the parking area that night. The brutality of the murder, combined with Hoffman's criminal history, which included previous violent offenses, led a jury to sentence him to death in 1998. He would go on to spend nearly 27 years on death row. Jesse Hoffman Jr.'s final meal request was fried catfish, hush puppies, coleslaw, a slice of pecan pie, and a can of root beer. The meal was served at Angola State Penitentiary just hours before the execution. When asked if he had any last words, Hoffman said, "I've made peace with God. I pray Molly's family finds peace too. I'm sorry for everything." Witnesses described his voice as quiet and controlled. He made no further comments. Hoffman's execution took place on March 18, 2025, at Louisiana State Penitentiary. The state had chosen nitrogen hypoxia, a method that deprives the body of oxygen using pure nitrogen gas, as its new form of execution following years of legal and pharmaceutical challenges surrounding lethal injection. At approximately 6:11 p.m., Hoffman was secured in a specially modified chair and fitted with a clear, airtight face mask connected to a nitrogen tank. The gas flow began at 6:13 p.m., and Hoffman reportedly lost consciousness within 30 seconds. He was pronounced dead at 6:25 p.m. There were no complications reported. Louisiana officials stated afterward that the execution proceeded precisely as planned. The execution of Jesse Hoffman Jr. marked Louisiana's return to the death penalty after a 15-year pause and the state's first use of nitrogen hypoxia. While the method was controversial, prison officials and state leaders called the procedure efficient and humane. The family of Molly Elliott released a brief statement. "We are relieved that this day has finally come. Molly deserved to live. We hope no other family ever has to wait this long for justice." Civil rights groups condemned the method, calling it experimental and potentially inhumane, but the state moved forward without delay. In death, Jesse Hoffman Jr. became the first person executed by nitrogen gas in Louisiana, and one of the most significant names in the story of capital punishment in 2025. Richard Gerald Jordan, Mississippi. The story of Richard Gerald Jordan is one of the longest-running capital punishment cases in U.S. history, stretching nearly 5 decades. In 1976, Jordan murdered Edna Marie Lucille Howe, the wife of a wealthy Gulfport bank executive, in what authorities described as a cold-blooded murder for ransom plot. Jordan, then 29, had devised a plan to kidnap a high-profile target and demand money. He called Benjamin Howe, posing as a delivery man, and arranged a meeting. Instead, he abducted Edna and forced her into the trunk of his car. Jordan later shot her in the back of the head and buried her body in a remote wooded area before ever collecting a ransom. He was arrested within days after telling a friend about the crime. A detailed confession followed, and Jordan was sentenced to death in 1977. But over the years, his case became infamous, not just for the crime, but for the numerous legal twists and retrials that followed. His death sentence was overturned multiple times due to technicalities, prosecutorial misconduct, and questions about whether Mississippi was pursuing execution out of vindictiveness. Still, after nearly 49 years, justice caught up. For his final meal, Richard Jordan declined to request a special menu. He was served the standard prison meal of chicken fried steak, green beans, cornbread, and iced tea, which he ate in silence, according to prison officials. Before his execution, Jordan offered a brief and soft-spoken apology. "I am deeply sorry for the pain I caused the Howe family. I can't take back what I did, but I hope this brings some measure of peace." He then turned his head toward the observation room, but made no eye contact with witnesses. No family members were present on either side. On June 25, 2025, at the Mississippi State Penitentiary in Parchman, Jordan was executed by lethal injection. The process began at 6:01 p.m., and he was pronounced dead at 6:15 p.m. Officials confirmed that no complications occurred. Jordan was 78 years old at the time of his death, making him one of the oldest prisoners executed in modern U.S. history. Jordan's execution sparked renewed discussion about delays in the justice system, with many pointing to the fact that he spent more time on death row than nearly any other American. His case became a focal point for legal scholars, death penalty opponents, and victims' rights groups. Mississippi's Attorney General released a statement following the execution. "Justice has been a long time coming, but today it has been served. Our thoughts are with the Howe family, who have waited far too long for closure." The execution of Richard Gerald Jordan closed one of the most complex capital cases in U.S. history and became a defining moment in Mississippi's modern death penalty record. According to Death Penalty Information Center, 11 executions remain scheduled in 7 states, such as Edward J. Zakrzewski, Florida. Edward J. Zakrzewski's case stands out as one of the most disturbing family murders in Florida's history. In 1994, Zakrzewski murdered his wife Sylvia and their 2 young sons, Benjamin, age 7, and Edward Jr., age 5, inside their family home in Niceville, Florida. According to investigators, Zakrzewski bludgeoned and stabbed his wife, then turned the weapon on his children, killing both boys in cold blood. After the murders, he cleaned the crime scene and fled the state. He was captured weeks later in Hawaii. Zakrzewski later confessed, claiming he was afraid of losing custody of his children amid marital tensions. His chilling account and lack of remorse shocked even seasoned law enforcement officers. He was convicted of 3 counts of first-degree murder and sentenced to death in 1996. His appeals have been repeatedly denied over the years, with courts upholding the original conviction and sentence. Zakrzewski's execution is scheduled for July 31st, 2025, by lethal injection at Florida State Prison. His case marks a continuation of Florida's efforts to carry out long-delayed death sentences, particularly in family-related homicides. Black murdered his longtime girlfriend, Angela Clay, and her 2 daughters, LaToya, age 9, and Lakeisha, age 6, in their Nashville home. According to prosecutors, Black shot all 3 victims execution style with a .45 caliber handgun. Angela was found in bed with a gunshot wound to the head, while both children were shot while they slept in their bedroom. The motive was believed to be rooted in domestic abuse and Black's anger over Angela trying to leave the relationship. The brutality of the crime, especially involving 2 young children, stunned the local community and led to swift legal action. In 1989, a jury found Black guilty of 3 counts of first-degree murder, and he was sentenced to death. Over the years, Black's defense team raised concerns about his mental competence and cognitive impairment, which led to multiple delays. However, in 2024, a federal appeals court ruled that the execution could move forward. Byron Lewis Black is scheduled to be executed on August 5, 2025, at Riverbend Maximum Security Institution in Nashville. Tennessee law allows death row inmates to choose between lethal injection and the electric chair, a choice Black has not publicly confirmed as of now. If carried out, it will be Tennessee's first execution since 2020 and one of the most high-profile in the state's modern death penalty history. Kale Barrington Bates, Florida. Kale Barrington Bates was convicted of a brutal crime that shocked Florida in the early 1980s. In 1982, Bates abducted Janet White, a 20-year-old college student and retail employee, from the parking lot of the store where she worked. According to case records, Bates attempted to sexually assault her during the abduction, and when she resisted, he strangled and bludgeoned her to death before dumping her body in a wooded area outside Gainesville. A bystander had noted a suspicious vehicle near the crime scene, leading investigators to Bates. Physical evidence, including fibers and fingerprints, tied him to the crime. He was arrested shortly after and confessed during police interrogation. In 1983, a Florida jury convicted him of first-degree murder, kidnapping, and attempted sexual battery, sentencing him to death. Over the decades, Bates filed numerous appeals and motions for clemency, all of which were denied. Courts consistently upheld the original ruling, citing the premeditated and cruel nature of the killing. Kale Barrington Bates is scheduled to be executed by lethal injection on August 19, 2025, at Florida State Prison in Rayford. If carried out, it will be one of several executions Florida has authorized for inmates sentenced decades earlier. His case highlights the long delays common in capital punishment proceedings and the lasting impact such crimes have on families seeking justice. 25-year-old woman from Birmingham, Alabama. According to court records, Roberts and Jones had been in a brief relationship that ended shortly before the murder. On the night of September 3, 1992, Roberts entered her home uninvited while she was alone. Armed with a stolen handgun, Roberts shot Anetra once in the chest, killing her instantly. He then poured gasoline around the living room and set the house on fire in an attempt to destroy evidence and cover up the crime. Neighbors spotted smoke and called emergency services. Firefighters discovered Jones's body in the charred remains of the home. An autopsy confirmed that she died from the gunshot wound and not the fire. Roberts was arrested within 48 hours. A search of his vehicle uncovered a gas can, a .38 caliber pistol, and a blood-stained shirt. Ballistic testing matched the gun to the bullet recovered from Anetra's body. Witnesses also testified that Roberts had threatened her in the days leading up to the murder. In 1994, Roberts was found guilty of capital murder and arson and sentenced to death. David Lee Roberts is scheduled to be executed on August 21, 2025, at Hoffman Correctional Facility in Atmore, Alabama. He will face execution by nitrogen hypoxia, a controversial method that deprives the brain and body of oxygen using pure nitrogen gas. This will mark Alabama's 6th execution using nitrogen hypoxia and the 7th time this method is used in the United States. Roberts has not publicly commented on his execution method, and no pending appeals are expected to delay the date. Ralph Leroy Menses, Utah. Ralph Leroy Menses was convicted of the 1986 abduction and murder of Maureen Hunsaker, a 26-year-old telephone company worker from Salt Lake County, Utah. On February 23rd of that year, Hunsaker was leaving work when Menses, who had previously worked as a janitor at the same facility, lured her into his car under false pretenses. He then drove her to a remote canyon area where he bound, gagged, and strangled her with a cord before slitting her throat and leaving her body in a wooded ravine. Her remains were discovered days later by hikers. Menses was arrested shortly after, based on witness statements and physical evidence that included his fingerprints inside her vehicle. He later gave a partial confession, though he tried to downplay his role. In 1988, he was sentenced to death for aggravated kidnapping and first-degree murder. Over the years, Menses filed repeated appeals, claiming ineffective counsel, intellectual disability, and cruel and unusual punishment. All appeals were ultimately denied. Menses is set to be executed on September 5, 2025, by firing squad, a rare and controversial method still permitted in Utah if lethal injection drugs are unavailable. He specifically chose this method, citing both practical and symbolic reasons. If carried out, Menses will become the first person executed by firing squad in Utah since 2010, and only the 4th in the U.S. since 1976. The execution will take place at Utah State Prison, where a secure chamber exists for this method. Witnesses will be present, and the use of the firing squad is expected to draw national media attention and further debate over execution practices in the United States. A 45-year-old convenience store clerk in Montgomery, Alabama. On the night of the crime, West entered the store armed with a revolver. Security footage captured him attempting to rob the register while McMillan complied with his demands. Despite the victim's cooperation, West shot him once in the head at close range, killing him instantly. He fled the scene with less than $200 in cash. Police located West within 48 hours using surveillance leads, and he was arrested while attempting to pawn the murder weapon. Ballistics matched the gun to the bullet found in McMillan's skull. A jury found West guilty of capital murder during a robbery, and he was sentenced to death in 1999. His appeals stretched over 2 decades, but all were ultimately denied. Courts upheld the sentence, citing the senseless and execution-style nature of the crime, as well as overwhelming evidence of guilt. West's execution is scheduled for September 25, 2025, by nitrogen hypoxia at Hoffman Correctional Facility. If carried out, this will be Alabama's 7th execution using the nitrogen method and one of the few such executions in U.S. history. West has not made any public statements regarding the execution method or filed any final motions for clemency. His execution is expected to proceed without delay. Blaine Milam. Blaine Milam was sentenced to death for one of the most disturbing child murder cases in Texas history, a crime prosecutors described as ritualistic and barbaric. In 2008, Milam and his girlfriend, Jessica Carson, were charged in the brutal killing of 13-month-old Amora Carson, Jessica's daughter. According to investigators, the couple believed the child was possessed by a demon. Milam claimed they were attempting to perform an exorcism, which led to the toddler being beaten, bitten, and tortured over an extended period. An autopsy revealed severe blunt force trauma, bite marks consistent with adult teeth, and injuries to nearly every part of her body. Forensic experts testified that Amora had endured hours of abuse, and the injuries could not be accidental or explained by any form of discipline. Both Milam and Carson were arrested at the scene. Carson received a life sentence without parole. Milam, seen as the dominant aggressor, was sentenced to death in 2010. Blaine Milam is scheduled to be executed by lethal injection on September 25, 2025 at the Huntsville unit in Texas. This date comes after multiple previous delays, including a 2019 stay due to concerns about the integrity of bite mark evidence. However, in 2024, a Texas appeals court upheld the conviction and cleared the way for execution. Milam has filed no new motions and is not expected to receive clemency. If carried out, his execution will bring to a close a case that shocked the nation with its cruelty and fueled ongoing debate about mental health, religion, and the death penalty. Small town of Dale, Indiana. The crime occurred on July 11, 2001, and left the quiet community in shock. According to court records, Ward, who had been recently released from jail on unrelated charges, broke into the Payne family's home late at night. Stacy was alone in the house at the time. Ward sexually assaulted her and then slashed her throat multiple times, leaving her to die on the bathroom floor. Her body was discovered by a family member the following morning. Investigators quickly identified Ward as a suspect based on witness sightings and forensic evidence. His fingerprints were found at the scene, and DNA confirmed the assault. He later confessed to the crime in detail. Ward was first sentenced to death in 2002, but legal battles followed. His original conviction was overturned on appeal due to concerns over pretrial publicity. He was retried and again sentenced to death in 2007, with the jury unanimously recommending the penalty. The state Supreme Court upheld the conviction, and federal courts later denied his habeas corpus petitions. After nearly 24 years of litigation, the case has reached its final chapter. Roy Lee Ward is scheduled to be executed by lethal injection on October 10, 2025 at Indiana State Prison in Michigan City. It will be Indiana's first execution since 2009, making it a significant moment for the state's capital punishment system. If carried out as planned, Ward's execution will close one of the longest-running and most emotionally charged cases in modern Indiana history. Lance C. Shockley, Missouri. Lance C. Shockley was convicted for the 2005 murder of Missouri Highway Patrol Sergeant Carl DeGraff, a decorated officer and father of 3. The killing took place in Carter County, where DeGraff had been investigating Shockley in connection with an earlier fatal hit-and-run accident. According to investigators, DeGraff had stopped at Shockley's rural home to follow up on the case when he was ambushed in his patrol vehicle. Shockley fired multiple shots with a high-powered rifle, striking the officer in the head and neck. DeGraff died instantly. His body was found slumped in the driver's seat, still wearing his seatbelt, with his patrol radio mic clutched in his hand. He had reportedly been calling in a suspicious vehicle just before the shots were fired. The investigation quickly led back to Shockley, who had a prior criminal record and had made threats against law enforcement. Forensic evidence, including shell casings and tire tracks, matched items found on Shockley's property. He was arrested and charged within days. At trial, prosecutors presented strong evidence that the murder was premeditated retaliation to avoid accountability in the earlier case. The jury deliberated just 5 hours before sentencing Shockley to death in 2006. Lance Shockley is scheduled to be executed by lethal injection on October 14, 2025, at Eastern Reception Diagnostic and Correctional Center in Bonne Terre, Missouri. While Missouri law still includes lethal gas as a backup, lethal injection remains the presumed method unless otherwise requested or unavailable. If the execution proceeds, it will be Missouri's first since 2023, and a high-profile case due to the victim being a uniformed state trooper. Law enforcement communities across the country are expected to observe the execution closely, and Sergeant DeGraff's family is anticipated to attend. In a case that has sparked years of controversy and debate over science and justice, the state alleged that Roberson killed his daughter by violently shaking her, resulting in a traumatic brain injury, what was then commonly referred to as shaken baby syndrome. According to trial testimony, Roberson had put Nikki to bed the night before, and when she was unresponsive the next morning, he took her to the emergency room. Doctors found signs of brain swelling, retinal hemorrhaging, and head trauma, injuries they believed were consistent with violent shaking. Roberson was arrested soon after, and in 2003, a jury convicted him of capital murder, sentencing him to death. However, Roberson has long maintained his innocence, claiming Nikki was sick with a fever and had a history of health problems, including breathing difficulties and previous falls. His legal team argued that outdated science and poor medical analysis led to a wrongful conviction. Over the last 2 decades, numerous appeals have been filed, many centering around new scientific skepticism regarding shaken baby syndrome. Several medical experts have since testified that the original conclusions were flawed or overly simplistic. Despite growing concerns from legal advocacy groups and even some medical professionals, Texas courts have repeatedly upheld the conviction. Robert Roberson is scheduled to be executed by lethal injection on October 16, 2025, at the Huntsville unit in Texas. His case remains controversial, with legal experts, pediatricians, and innocence groups closely watching the outcome. If carried out, Roberson's execution will add to the long list of Texas death penalty cases that continue to raise serious questions about forensic science and wrongful convictions. Harold Nichols. Harold Nichols was convicted in the 1988 rape and murder of 21-year-old Karen Pulley in Chattanooga, Tennessee. Karen was a young college student who had gone out for a jog near her apartment when she encountered Nichols. What followed was a brutal sexual assault and homicide that left the community shaken. According to court records, Nichols abducted Karen from the roadside and dragged her into a wooded area. There, he sexually assaulted her, then bludgeoned her to death with a rock. Her body was discovered the next day by a hiker, partially concealed beneath branches and leaves. Police quickly focused on Nichols, who had previously been convicted of a series of rapes in the area. DNA evidence linked him to the crime scene, and during questioning, he confessed to the murder. In 1990, he was found guilty of first-degree murder and aggravated rape and sentenced to death. His long history of violence against women, including multiple prior assaults, was a major factor in the jury's recommendation for the death penalty. Harold Nichols is scheduled to be executed on December 11, 2025, at Riverbend Maximum Security Institution in Nashville. Under Tennessee law, inmates sentenced before 1999 can choose between lethal injection and the electric chair. As of now, Nichols has not publicly indicated a preference. If carried out, it will mark Tennessee's second execution of the year, and the state's continued use of legacy execution options in long-standing death penalty cases. His execution will likely draw public attention, given the violent nature of the crime and the time elapsed, 37 years since the murder, and more than 3 decades on death row. Capital punishment. Let us know in the comments, which execution method shocked you the most? And where do you stand on the death penalty in 2025? Like, subscribe, and hit the bell. We'll continue tracking these scheduled executions, final appeals, and any last-minute developments right here.